Hi, this is Jay Watts with Merely Human Ministries. One of the questions I'm asked the most when I'm home is, what's it like out there? Has it changed? How has the charged political climate affected what you do on college campuses and our high school campuses when we go in and we give presentations, take Q&A, have conversations with kids after? And how it has changed, or at least for me it has changed since the 10 years that I've been doing this. The first thing that I would say, the first noticeable change is that you get more now a strong level of assertion, a declaration, not arguments. People really aren't arguing. They're declaring, I have a right to do this, no matter what. It used to be a time where, for the most part, when I talk to students, what they would argue is the tough cases. What do you do on these fringe cases? Rape, life of the mother, fetal abnormalities, all these sorts of things. Now there's just a blanket declaration that I'm hearing that I have a right to do this, to have an abortion at any time for any reason without you interfering or anybody else interfering. So it's hardened a little bit there, right? I mean, it used to be a time where people saw that there was something wrong, but wanted to reserve this right, this protected right, because they were looking to protect the extreme cases, these abnormalities, these things that happen that are out of the norm. But now there's just a hardcore declaration without argument, without any consideration for what the unborn are, that they have a right to do whatever they want under any circumstances without any judgment or any interference from anyone at all. The second thing that has done is has led to more shaming. There seems to be more of an effort, I feel like, for people to be told they feel bad, men or women. I mean, oftentimes you'll see them say that men shouldn't have anything to say about that, but then all of my women friends who are pro-lifers who start to speak out on it, and by far, by the way, the majority of people that I know in the pro-life movement are women, and most of them are young women. And when these women speak out, they get beat down just as much as anybody else does. It's not like they have some special right. It's, you get that place where any stick is a good stick to beat the pro-life cause with right now. And so they may say, you don't have a right to speak, Jay, because you're a man, but then one of my friends says something that's a woman, like say Megan Holman, one of my good friends, and they come after her just the same way as well. It's not that being a man disqualifies me, because being a woman disqualifies their opinion as well. They're just angry that anybody would question it, and they're attempting to shame people. How dare you fight against this? How dare you put women at risk? You don't care about the lives of women. All you want to do is interfere with other people's sexual choices. You want to restrict women and turn them back into something from the past. So not only have we gotten to a place where there's more assertion without argument, there's more ad hominem now. There's less argument altogether and more just attack the people who want to argue. And the last thing that I would say that I've noticed is that Twitter, I'm not a huge fan of Twitter. I feel like it has some really good uses. It's a great place to get links to articles. But what it has mostly done, other than be a hate engine, is weaponized brevity. It has created a whole generation of people that can be maximally cruel and dismissive in 140 characters. That's what it has done more than anything. It's taught us how to dismiss other people in as quickly and efficiently way as possible. And so what happens now is that carries over conversationally, where people are looking for pithiness and brevity more than they're looking for reflection and deep thought on those issues. So that's not all good. There's some bad there, but I'm optimistic about that we can find a strategy for dealing with this. Number one of the things that I want to say as a form of encouragement for all people out there who are arguing the pro-life position, and by way of explanation for other people who don't hold that position, I will never be ashamed for arguing the position that all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect. I will never feel bad about arguing that every single human life ought to be treated with dignity and respect simply because of its humanity, because it being a human qualifies it for meaningful membership in the human family. You should never feel bad for arguing that we should treat other human beings with respect, and minimally, when we come in contact with other human life, we should restrain ourselves from ending that life because it's inconvenient, because it's in our way, because it's not the right time for me to be in a relationship with that life. You should never feel bad for holding that position. That is a position that says that all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect. It's what Christopher Kaiser, a Catholic philosopher, says in the inclusive view of human value. And so how do we become more productive about having conversations in an atmosphere that's become more urgent. Well, some of that urgency, a lot of that urgency is obviously being driven by how all of these things are conflating. It's not just a moral argument, it's a legal argument, it's the sense of laws impending, it's states passing laws, it's people arguing about it on TV, and it's all generating this big mess of emotion, and people just aren't thinking clearly. So one of the first things that I like to do, primarily as a strategy that I want to talk about today, is separating the moral argument initially from the legal argument. See, they're angry because they feel like I want to control their body, which I don't. I have absolutely no interest in what they're doing with their body, except insofar as their actions affect another human life and reflection on what that actually means. And so what I want to do is say, stop right there. Let's look. What's making you angry is that I hold a different position about what it means to be human than you do, or to have meaningful human life, or to what our duties and obligations are to other human beings. But let's look at what the pro-life essentially position is saying. What it's essentially saying, it's saying that all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect from the moment that they come into existence until the time that they die their natural death. It's saying that when we encounter another human life, we don't have the right to rid ourselves of that life. We have an obligation or a duty, we call a negative obligation, to not kill it, not to destroy it. And that's the basic minimum that we owe to any other human beings, to all other human lives. That's what the pro-life position says. The moral case that we're making is that from the moment that they come into existence, they are human and a human life. Now, this is a scientific argument. We expand on this much more on the website, through other blog posts, through other podcasts, and we will grow that on our website as well at merelyhumanministries.org. But let's just say, for example, Steve Jacobs at University of Chicago just finished his PhD thesis, and he asked over 5,000 academic biologists when the life of a human being begins, and 96% of them affirmed that it begins at fertilization. This is a question of science, not a question of opinion. Life begins at fertilization. So now the question becomes, who gets to draw a line through the human family? Say, I have human life here. To the best of our ability to discern, life has begun here. So who gets to draw a line through the human family and say, but this is a human life that doesn't matter, and this human life over here, this is persons, and these do matter. This is a philosophical argument. So the basic pro-life position is that I don't have the right, you don't have the right, nobody has the right. At our website, you'll see where it says they are, we are, I am. The they are is all of them, the unborn, embryonic humans, terminally ill, people that are severely handicapped. They are all merely human. That is all they need to be for me to treat them with dignity and respect. The next thing that it says, though, is that we are merely human. And once we get from the scientific declaration that human life begins at fertilization to the philosophical point that all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect because of what they are, because they're human beings, now this is where we get to the point of saying we are merely human. We don't have a right to draw a line through the human family and declare some of our brothers and sisters in the human family as being less than others. We can't say they can't do this, can't do that, they can't think rationally, they can't feel, they can't want, they can't do any of those things yet, and so they are less than you and me on a fundamental level, and I can do to them what I want. They can't feel pain, whatever. Well, why can't they feel pain? Because they haven't been allowed to mature to the point that they can. Why can they not think rationally yet? Because they haven't been allowed to mature to the point at which they can. Why can they not interact with other human beings? Why can they not want? Why can they not desire? Why can't they communicate things to the rest of us on a fundamental level? Because we won't let them live long enough to be able to do those things. There's nothing about them that means they won't get there. We just won't allow them to get to that point that we will declare them. If they could only get there, then I couldn't kill them, but I won't let them get there, so I can. The moral case that we're making here is that all human life ought to be treated with dignity and respect from the moment that they come into existence. And the case that we're making is that what makes you valuable during your life on this earth is that you're a human being. As a Christian, I understand that as being the image bearer of God. But our intuitions are shared among Christians and non-Christians alike. There's a reason why I've talked before we all like Mr. Rogers, because he treats kids the way we think kids ought to be treated. He treats other human beings the way that we think people ought to be treated. We aspire to see people as nice as him. We hold that up as a value because there is a right way to treat people. And then there's a wrong way to treat people. And the pro-life position is differentiating between those two. all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect. We are all merely human. None of us have the right to draw that line, and we could never, ever trust that one of our fellow humans drew that line correctly. So we got to get there before we move to the legal argument. Convince me. This isn't forcing my opinion on people. This is trying to convince them of a moral case. I'm trying to convince you that the science and philosophy make the most sense of the idea that every human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect. I'm not demanding that you believe what I believe. I want to help you to understand what I believe in the hopes that you will see it as a better explanation for all human relationships and a better way for us to get along with each other, not just in this issue, but all issues. But we can't convince everyone. And some people see that as a problem. Some people see, well, not everyone is going to be convinced. That's true. But as Hadley Arcus once said, an absence of consensus doesn't indicate an absence of truth. Just because we're not all convinced doesn't mean that not enough of us are convinced for us to take action. So here's where we get to the legal discussion. Leon Kass, in his book, Life, Liberty, and Defense of Dignity, talked about the idea that first, primarily, we have to discuss ethics. We have to convince people of our moral case, our ethical case. But at some point or another, we have to recognize that not everyone will be convinced. And that's where law comes in. That's when we pass laws. All laws are the legislation of somebody's morality. People will say you can't legislate morality. Every single law is the legislation of someone's morality. There was a young man that stood up when I was speaking in Virginia, and he said, not all laws. He said, Mr. Watts, what about the law that says that you have to drive on the right side of the street or the left side of the street? He said, that's arbitrary, whether you drive on the right or the left. Just that decision is arbitrary. We could have driven on either the right or the left, just like when we were in England last year, they drove on the opposite side of the street. But what isn't arbitrary is the determination that we must make a decision that all people will follow. Because it is wrong to just drive wherever you want if driving wherever you want means that other human beings will be hurt unnecessarily. So that is a moral law, even though the decision on what side of the street to drive on is an arbitrary decision within that moral law. All of them, all laws represent someone's morality. And so Leon Kass says, look, you're never going to convince everyone. So what do we need to do? At some point we pass laws. Because the laws aren't there for the people who are morally convinced and convicted that it would be wrong to do those things and adjust their behavior on their own. The law is there to stop the people who refuse to be convinced of what the majority of us, the overwhelming majority of us when we pass these laws, are convinced of is the right thing to do. And so it restricts their behavior. So the moral case is a question of convincing people. We're not forcing our beliefs on people. We're trying to convince them of the morality of the pro-life position, that all human beings ought to be treated with dignity and respect. The law follows that once enough people become convinced of that truth. And then in the United States, if Roe v. Wade goes away, it'll become very state to state. In states like Georgia, you'll probably have much more abortion restrictive laws. In states like New York, obviously, they're all in on abortion permissive laws. And then people will have to decide which community they want to reside in based on the things that they wish to do if the states and individual communities are now allowed to make those decisions for themselves. So, all of that to say, what do we do going forward for me and my ministry? At the end of the day, as I evaluated all of this and all of these questions and the environment that we live in and how to interact and separating the legal from the morality and recognizing that there's just a ramped up emotion in this issue right now, that is the environment in which Merely Human Ministries came to exist. It didn't have to exist in the sense that when Scott and I were talking at Life Training Institute, when I was deciding to leave Life Training Institute, I wasn't initially certain I was starting a new organization. I weighed other options. I just saw last night a movie called Ford versus Ferrari, and they had a great discussion in there about the difference between how you approach your job and the things that you like to do. And I resonated with one of those lines in there when he talks about the idea of loving what you do and being good at what you do and never working. But then he says that there are some people who are just obsessed. They have an obsession. Since I became a Christian, since the moment I became a Christian, there has been something that has, I think, fair to say that has obsessed me. That is, there is a right way to treat human beings. When I wasn't a Christian, I didn't believe that. I thought that all laws, all morality was subjective. But now, as soon as I became a Christian, I believe we were made for a purpose and a point by a being who wanted something for us. And within that list of things that he wanted with us, a right relationship with him being of the utmost importance, but a right relationship with everyone else being of secondary importance. All the other creations that he has made, primarily speaking at this point, especially of the human creations, all of our brothers and sisters in this world, there is a right way to treat them. That is my obsession, that we should treat other human beings with dignity and respect. And so, as I sat down with my wife Tracy and we talked about what we wanted to do next, so let's start an organization. Let's start an organization where we just figure out as many ways as we can say that. Merely Human Ministries is looking forward to 2020. Our first year has been great. It's been a little quiet in the sense that we have worked behind the scenes to work on partnerships and cooperations with other organizations. We have built a team. I'm starting to get people around me that work well with what we're doing and understand the vision of what we want. There's Nathan Apodaca, who's been contributing to our blog, and who I'm hoping to get a lot more of. He has projects that he's interested in doing with us in the next year. There's Nathan Johnson, who is helping film this and edit this. My two Nathans, who have come together to help me produce things. And as we look forward to the content that we want to make in the coming years, as I talk to the board of directors, it's key that we have a vision for what we exist to do. And what we exist to do is to say in as many ways as possible, with as much clarity as possible, without any shame or guilt in saying so, every single human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect during the entire course of its life. And some of the projects that we're going to be working on in the next year that I'm most excited about are ambitious. They're meant to address not just the normal things that we address. We will be putting a PDF on our website soon of just 5 basic questions in abortion dialogue that we made for another organization that they've given us permission to share. But some of the other things are in response to the moment, to now. One of those things is that New York Times and other organizations have been running a lot of history of abortion articles. We have already started to answer that on our own blog, and we will continue to do so as we look at the history of abortion and we try to clear up some misconceptions, and we try to evaluate the social and moral cost of laws both in the past and going forward on abortion. Another thing that I've noticed that we want to talk about is that I've been getting a lot of email from people, some of them Christians who have been led to feel very bad about holding a pro-life position, that have started to say I'm personally pro-life, but politically I think I'm going pro-choice because I shouldn't be allowed to tell other people what they can do. And then in other cases, it is Christians who have declared that there is nothing particularly Christian about the pro-life position, and there's nothing unchristian about the pro-choice position. So we're going to take a serious look at that in the next year in 2 forms. Number one, we're going to go through on the blog, both Nathan and I are going to work on publishing pieces that answer that question. And then another thing that I intend to do, and this is an ambitious job, we're going to try to blog through the Bible. We're going to go from the beginning to the very end, starting this year, and we're going to look for 2 things in there. Number one, is there some guiding principle throughout it all that is articulated that says how we ought to treat each other? And number 2, is there an overriding implied culture that we can take from the Bible about how we should understand our relationship to our children and to the next generation and to the generation that preceded us? We're going to look at those 2 things. We're going to answer more individually on the blog where we address things like, does the fact that the abortion is not mentioned in the Bible and that abortion is not condemned in the Bible mean that it's okay? And if that's true, then what would that mean if something like chattel slavery here in the United States that isn't condemned in the Bible, but what many of the abolitionists who fought against it used the Imago Dei, the image bearers of God, and the implied value of human life in the Bible to stand against it and to say that it was evil, or things like sex slavery that are not explicitly condemned in the Bible, but that we can take from the Bible the idea that human beings ought to be treated a certain way and then carry that over to those issues. And so if we can do that with those, and I think that we can, then the question is, why would silence on the issue of abortion preclude us from doing it if we can determine that the culture of the Bible is one that affirms children as a blessing and not as an impediment to being able to explore individual goals? So we're going to try to blog through the entire Bible from beginning to end with a focus on how it impacts these issues. I want to take very seriously the people that say that the pro-choice position works in concert with Christianity, and to be able to see if we can find out if the Bible backs them up, or if the Bible would teach us what I believe it would teach us, is that when you see pregnancy in the Bible, it's a blessing. When you see the inability to have children, it's seen as a curse or a problem to overcome. When you see people having children, you see that as something good and the growth of their family and their community. When you see their children being taken from them, it's often in the terms of curse or judgment or things of that nature. So that I believe that the Bible is going to hold out on that. So that's the vision going forward. We're putting together the team to take this on, but to take it on with a very simple declaration that the purpose of the existence of this organization is to say that human life matters and that we ought to treat each other well. And we are going to find as many ways as we can to say that in 2020 and going forward without apology and without qualification. And if you understand, if you're on the other side of this and you have a belief or a view of human life that gives you the justification to do the things that you want, minimally you need to understand that the pro-life people cannot and will not ever be shamed into being quiet, because it isn't about controlling other people, because it isn't about forcing our ideas on other people, because it isn't necessarily just about religion. What it's about is a culture that recognizes the value of every single human life. And that's what we'll continue to do. This is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. Have a happy new year, and we look forward to working with many of you in 2020.